After 28 years, they kicked me out saying, "We don't hire old people." I walked away quietly and signed the papers. My name is Tom, and I'm 52 years old. I've worked at the same tech firm for over 30 years, which I suppose makes me something of a rarity these days. People come and go, but I stayed. I'm not the kind of guy who gets attached to change. I like stability, routine, the quiet certainty of knowing exactly what I'll be doing each day. It wasn't always like this, of course. When I first started at the company, I was just another college grad, eager to prove myself. I wore my youth like a badge of honor, fresh ideas, ambitious plans, and the kind of energy you only get when you're in your 20s. I remember those early years, long hours, late nights, and the thrill of a challenge. I made mistakes, of course. Everyone does when they're new. But I learned quickly, and I kept pushing forward. By the time I hit my 40s, I had settled into a comfortable groove. I wasn't climbing the corporate ladder anymore, but I didn't need to. I had my place, my responsibilities, and a team of people who depended on me. I had earned respect from my peers and from the younger guys who'd come up after me. I'd spent my days working with clients, managing projects, and mentoring new hires. I loved it. I took pride in what I had built. There was something incredibly fulfilling about knowing that, at the end of the day, I was good at what I did. My clients trusted me, my boss liked me, and my colleagues respected me. I was no longer a kid trying to prove something. I was the guy who got things done, the guy people turned to when the work needed to be finished. And then there was the security. My job wasn't flashy, but it was stable. The company had weathered the economic downturns, the tech bubble bursts, and everything in between. I had a pension plan waiting for me, and I had more than enough savings to retire comfortably. The thought of leaving never crossed my mind. Why would it? I was well established, and retirement was just a few years away. Maybe 5, maybe 6, and I'd be free. I looked forward to it, dreamed of it even. Quiet mornings, time with my grandkids, maybe a little part-time consulting on the side. I'd earned it. My daily routine became my life. I'd wake up at 6:30, brew a pot of coffee, and leave my house by 7:30 to catch the freeway into work. My commute wasn't terrible, about 30 minutes if traffic wasn't too bad. On the drive, I'd listen to the news, maybe some jazz, and think about the day ahead. I liked the quiet time. It gave me a moment to collect my thoughts before diving into the whirlwind of emails, meetings, and client calls that would consume the rest of my day. At the office, I had a small corner cubicle. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I liked the solitude, the peace of being surrounded by the hum of the office without the distractions of too many people around. I didn't need a fancy title or an executive office. I just needed to do my job and do it well. By lunch, I'd walk downstairs to the cafe for my usual, a turkey sandwich, a cup of soup, and maybe a soda if I was feeling fancy. I'd eat alone, like always, and read the paper or scroll through my phone. After that, I'd head back to my desk and settle into the afternoon grind. Everything felt predictable, safe, comfortable. But then something changed. It was subtle at first, a shift in the air, like the first sign of an approaching storm. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but I felt it in the way people started talking around me, in the way the younger employees, those fresh-faced college grads, would glance at me when I walked past, as if they were sizing me up, as if I didn't belong here anymore. I tried to dismiss it. After all, I was just doing my job, like always. But there was an unease growing inside me, a feeling that I couldn't shake. And then came the new manager. I didn't know what to expect when they brought him in. James Carter, 33 years old, fresh from some high-flying startup in the city. From the moment he stepped through the door, I knew things were going to change. His youth was obvious. The way he spoke, the energy he brought into a room, it was all so new, so different from the steady, calm environment I had grown comfortable in. At first, it seemed harmless enough. He was enthusiastic, eager to prove himself. We all were once. I didn't mind him too much. He came in with big plans, a vision for modernizing the company. He was all about efficiency, cutting costs, and streamlining operations. To be honest, I didn't see the need for it. We had a solid system in place, but I kept my opinions to myself. After all, he was the boss now. But then I started noticing little things, small comments here and there that rubbed me the wrong way. Tom, can you still keep up with the new systems we're implementing? Maybe it's time you let the younger guys handle the more complex projects. These weren't outright insults, but they were enough to make me wonder. I had been handling complex projects for years. I knew the systems better than anyone, but something in the way he said it made me feel irrelevant. At first it was just one or two comments, but soon it became a pattern. I found myself excluded from meetings I would have normally attended. My projects were being handed off to the younger employees. I wasn't being told why, just that it was better for the team. I tried to shrug it off. Maybe I was just overthinking things. But then, the real blow came. One Friday afternoon, James called me into his office. I figured it was just another meeting about some new initiative or another project that needed my input. But when I sat down across from him, I could tell something was off. He didn't smile, didn't greet me the way he usually did. He just looked at me for a long moment before speaking. Tom, he said, his voice cold, we've been reviewing the team structure, and we've decided to go in a different direction. I blinked. My heart skipped a beat. I didn't know what he meant. You're being let go, he said bluntly. We're bringing in new blood, younger, more dynamic people, people who can keep up with the pace we need. It took a moment for his words to sink in. Let go? Me? After 32 years? I opened my mouth to say something, but the words wouldn't come. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it all. You've been a great asset to the company, Tom, James continued, but we're moving forward, and we need to make some tough decisions. I sat there numb. I didn't know what to say. What could I say? Finally, I found my voice, though it was quieter than I expected. You're firing me because I'm old, aren't you? James didn't answer right away. He shifted in his chair, looking uncomfortable. Look, Tom, it's nothing personal. It's just, you know how it is. We're looking to the future. I stood up, feeling the weight of his words settle like a lead blanket over me. I didn't bother shaking his hand. Good luck with that, I muttered, more to myself than to him, and left the office without looking back. The drive home was a blur. The world outside the car seemed to move in slow motion, as if it were watching me and waiting for me to figure out what had just happened. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. How could this have happened? One moment, I was a valued part of the team, and the next, I was just discarded. I kept hearing James's words echoing in my head. We're looking to the future. The future. He said it like it was something so inevitable, so necessary. But for me, it felt like a death sentence. The whole drive, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I felt embarrassed, humiliated, like someone had just told me that I was no longer good enough to be alive in the world I had spent 32 years building. When I pulled into my driveway, I couldn't even bring myself to get out of the car immediately. I sat there for a long while, staring at the dashboard, trying to make sense of everything. I thought back to all the years I had spent working overtime, all the times I had missed family events because I was putting in that extra hour, the sacrifices I had made. And for what? To be told I was too old? It didn't make sense. It didn't feel real. But when I walked into the house, my wife, Linda, was already home. She was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone. I could tell right away something was off, the way she looked at me, like she knew. Tom? Her voice was soft, unsure. What happened? I threw my jacket over the back of the chair and sat down, rubbing my forehead. I was fired, I muttered. They said they're moving in a different direction. I'm too old for them. Linda blinked, processing the words. But you've been with them for how long? 30 years? I nodded, my throat tightening. 32. She sighed, shaking her head, clearly not knowing what to say. I don't understand. After all that time, they just throw you out like that? I stared down at the table, my thoughts racing, but I had no answers. The anger was starting to build now, slowly, just beneath the surface. It wasn't fair. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. I'm sorry, Linda said, reaching across the table to touch my hand. But we'll figure this out. You'll find another job. I looked up at her. At 52? After what just happened? The words stung as they left my mouth, but they were the truth. I'm not going to find anything. No one's going to hire me. The next few days were a blur. I sat at home staring at the TV, playing with the idea of looking for a new job. But every time I searched online, I was filled with a sense of dread. The job listings were filled with keywords like dynamic, energetic, innovative. And inevitably, the job descriptions often listed a preference for candidates with fresh perspectives and enthusiasm. Code words for young. I scrolled through them and felt a weight in my chest. I was too old for this, too experienced, too outdated. But I didn't want to admit it. The pride that had once made me stand tall began to crumble. I had always believed that experience counted for something, that there was a place in the world for people like me, but now all that belief felt like it was slowly slipping away. Linda kept encouraging me to keep looking. She said the right things. You've got so much to offer, she'd say. You just need to find the right place. But as the days passed, I started feeling smaller and smaller. I would wake up in the morning and feel the same dread I had when I was younger, back when I first started job hunting after college. But now it was different. I had a lifetime of experience, but I was no longer marketable. No one cared that I had led teams, handled million-dollar accounts, or built up a reputation over the years. I was just another old guy, a relic of a time long past. And the interviews, God, the interviews were the worst. I remember the first one. It was for a project management position at a smaller firm in the city. The company seemed decent enough, not as big as the one I had come from, but I figured it was worth a shot. I showed up, dressed in my best suit, ready to impress. But the moment I walked into that office and saw the young hiring manager, a guy who looked like he'd just come out of college, it hit me. I could feel the judgment in his eyes. Thanks for coming in, he said, but it was clear he was more interested in the time on his watch than in me. He didn't even offer me a seat at first, just pointed to a chair across from him. I sat down and tried to project confidence, but I felt my hands sweating, my throat dry. The interview was painfully short. He asked me a few questions, but it was clear from the start that he wasn't interested in my answers. His body language was all wrong, his arms crossed, his eyes scanning the computer screen more than they were looking at me. At one point, he even glanced at his watch and muttered, "We're really looking for someone who can move quickly on new tech. Do you think you can keep up with that?" I could feel the heat rising in my chest. Keep up. I had been working with tech before he even knew how to spell the word, but I bit my tongue and forced myself to answer calmly. "I'm familiar with the latest trends, yes." He nodded, but I saw the skepticism in his eyes. "All right, Tom, thanks for your time. We'll be in touch." That was it. No handshake, no follow-up questions, just a polite brush-off. I drove home that day feeling lower than I had in years. What had happened to me? How did I go from being a go-to person in my field to some unwanted relic? But then, something inside me snapped. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was desperation, or maybe it was just plain stubbornness. But I made a decision. I wasn't going to beg for a job. I wasn't going to spend the next few months wallowing in rejection. I was going to start my own business. The first few weeks after deciding to go it alone were rough. You can never really prepare for the reality of starting a business, not when you're in your 50s, and especially not when your savings are tight and every client feels like an uphill battle. I remember sitting in my living room, staring at the paperwork I had pulled together. I had spent most of my career managing big projects, overseeing teams, but now I was trying to do something completely different, something that felt more personal. I'd decided to start a consulting service, helping small businesses with their operations, leveraging all the years I'd spent streamlining processes in the corporate world. It seemed like the right fit, but the reality hit hard. I called a few of the contacts I'd made over the years, but those calls didn't go anywhere. I'd be talking to someone, and you could tell right away they didn't take me seriously anymore. They were polite, sure, but I could hear the underlying skepticism in their voices. "Oh, that's great, Tom. Well, we'll think about it," they'd say, and that would be the end of the conversation. The phone would hang up and I'd sit there, wondering if I was just wasting my time. Then came the financial strain. I had to invest in the business up front. Website, marketing, office space. Even though I didn't have much money to spare, And when the first bills started rolling in, it was hard not to panic. There were days when I would sit at my desk, looking at the spreadsheets, feeling the weight of it all pressed down on me. Would this work? Would I be able to make this work? But there was something inside me that kept pushing me forward, even when everything seemed stacked against me. I could have given up. I could have turned back and started searching for another job, even if it meant accepting the kind of humiliation that came with being the old guy in the room. But I wasn't ready to do that yet, not after everything I'd been through. It wasn't long before I realized I couldn't just rely on the old contacts or on people I'd worked with in the past. I had to get creative. So I started reaching out to local businesses, shops, restaurants, even construction firms, and offered them free consultations. I told them I'd help them organize their operations, make them more efficient. At first, most of them weren't interested, but one or two were. They needed help with their supply chains, with managing inventory, with understanding their finances. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was work. And slowly, painfully slowly, the business started to pick up. I remember the first time I got paid for a real job. It was for a local auto repair shop down the street. They'd been struggling with their scheduling software, their billing, and their workflow. I went in, took a look at everything, and laid out a plan to streamline the process. At the time, it felt like the smallest victory. The check they handed me wasn't huge, but it was enough to keep the lights on for another month. And that's how it went, bit by bit. I was working 12 to 14 hours a day, often with no help, and the days felt long. But with each new client, my confidence grew. I began to feel like maybe this whole thing could actually work. Slowly, my name started to get out there. Word of mouth spread, and businesses were calling me. Some of them were even referring me to other businesses. It wasn't just the small players anymore either. I started getting calls from bigger companies, companies that had been too busy to pay attention to me when I was just another corporate guy in my suit and tie. At one point, I hired a part-time assistant to help me keep up with everything. Her name was Carla, a young woman in her 20s who just graduated college. She was enthusiastic, driven, and had a keen mind for organization. It was refreshing to see someone so eager, and I could tell she respected me for what I was doing. I was teaching her a lot, and she was teaching me a few things too, about new technology, fresh approaches, and how to better communicate with younger clients. It was a strange feeling. I had gone from a corporate office filled with suits and shiny floors to working in a small, cramped office in the back of my house. But there was something freeing about it. I was my own boss, and I was making my own decisions. I wasn't bound by corporate rules or by some young manager who thought he knew everything. I could shape this business however I wanted, and it felt good. But I wasn't about to forget what had happened. Every time I looked at the pile of bills on my desk or saw my bank balance teetering on the edge, I remembered. I remembered James and how his face had been so sure of itself when he told me I was too old. Too old to contribute, too old to matter. But as my little business started to grow, I found that I didn't need their approval. I didn't need anyone to tell me I was worth something. I knew it, and that was enough. A year passed, and I had enough clients to keep the business stable. I wasn't rich, but I was comfortable. And more importantly, I was proud of what I had built. The phone calls started coming in more frequently, and the business had a reputation in the area. I had even managed to hire a couple more people, both of them younger than me, but eager to learn. One evening, as I was finishing up some paperwork in my office, the phone rang. I wasn't expecting any calls at that hour, but when I saw the number on the screen, my stomach dropped. It was James. I answered the phone reluctantly, my pulse quickening. Tom? His voice was almost too polite, too professional. James here, from Cobalt Solutions. How have you been? I could hear the discomfort in his tone. I could tell this wasn't a social call. He was stalling, trying to find the right words. I'm doing well, I said, keeping my voice calm, but I couldn't hide the bitterness that crept in. I'm managing. How about you? Well, actually, he said after a pause, we're going through some issues over here, some operational difficulties. You might have heard we've lost a few clients recently. Anyway, I've been wondering if you might be able to help us. We could really use someone with your experience. My hands clenched into fists. The audacity. This man, the same one who had stood in my office not so long ago, telling me that I was too old, was now asking for my help, asking me to bail them out. I took a deep breath. I could feel the power in this moment. James, I said, my voice icy, I'm not interested in working with you, but I'll tell you what, I'll send you an invoice for my consulting services, and if you can pay me a fair price, we'll see what we can do. There was silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. You're serious? He asked finally. Absolutely, I replied, not giving him an inch. But just so you know, my rates are a lot higher than they used to be. And just like that, the tables had turned. 2 years had passed since that conversation with James. My business was no longer just surviving, it was thriving. My consulting service had grown into a local powerhouse. I'd expanded my operations, hired more staff, and even started working with clients outside of my immediate area. Word of mouth was powerful, and people were starting to realize that age didn't equate to irrelevance. It was experience that mattered. And the older you were, the more of it you had. I learned over the years that persistence, patience, and dedication could make up for a lot of shortcomings. I'd come to embrace my age, not as a weakness, but as a badge of honor. I had weathered the storm, and I'd come out stronger for it. Then one crisp fall morning, it happened. I was in my office finalizing a contract with a new client when the phone rang. I looked at the caller ID and saw the familiar name, Cobalt Solutions. The words hit me like a ton of bricks. My stomach tightened. It was James. My hand hovered over the receiver, my mind racing. I knew this day was coming. I'd been expecting it. The company had been struggling for a while, and I had heard rumors that they were on the brink of losing a major contract. Still, hearing from James now, after everything he'd done to me, felt like the last bit of salt in an old wound. I answered the phone, my voice steady but with a hint of ice behind it. Tom, Tom, James said, his tone almost apologetic. It's been a while. I hope everything's been going well for you. I didn't respond right away. His words felt hollow, almost scripted. He wasn't here for a friendly catch-up. He had a reason for calling, and I knew what it was. We've been going through some challenges, James continued, trying to sound as professional as possible, but I could hear the desperation in his voice. I'm calling because we need help. Your expertise, well, it's something we could really use right now. I let out a small, almost imperceptible laugh. I couldn't help it. The audacity of him, calling me like this after everything. You've got some nerve, I said, my voice calm but cutting. After the way you treated me, after firing me because you thought I was too old for the job. Now you want my help? There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could hear him fumbling, trying to salvage the conversation. Tom, look, I know things didn't go the way they should have, and I'm sorry. I didn't understand back then. But we're in a tough spot now. If you could just, please consider working with us again. We'll pay you whatever you want. We need you. I could almost picture him, sitting at his desk, his face flushed with frustration, trying to make the words come out in the right way. I thought for a moment. James was desperate, no doubt about it. The company had lost clients left and right, and now they were scraping the bottom of the barrel, trying to find someone to help them. He wanted me to save him, and I had every right to refuse. But I wasn't going to do that. I wasn't going to let him off easy. No, I said, my voice cold. I'm not going to help you, James, but I will offer you something. What? He asked, his voice tense. I'll send you an invoice for consulting services, I said. At a rate you'll find hard to swallow. I'm sure you'll need my expertise, but it'll cost you. There was a long silence. I could hear his breath catch. I could almost feel the tension in the air, like he was waiting for me to back down. But I wasn't going to back down. You can't be serious, he finally said, his tone turning defensive. This isn't about money. It's about saving the company. I could hear the panic creeping into his voice. He was starting to crack. It is about money, I replied evenly. You don't get to treat me like I'm disposable and then ask me to bail you out without consequences. If you want my help, you'll pay for it. The full price. There was another long silence. I could practically hear the wheels turning in his head. Finally, he spoke again, his voice more resigned this time. "Fine," he said quietly. "Send me the invoice. We'll pay you." I smiled even though he couldn't see it. "Good. I'll send it over today," I said, hanging up the phone. A few weeks later, the invoice I'd sent James was paid in full. The payment wasn't small either. It was a reminder that I'd never been too old to be valuable. It was a reminder that sometimes the best revenge isn't in direct confrontation. It's in making people realize what they lost when they underestimated you. In the weeks following, my business continued to grow. Word of mouth spread even further, and I began working with more high-profile clients. Meanwhile, Cobalt Solutions continued to slip further into decline. Their reputation was tarnished, and I could see that James was struggling to hold things together. Then a few months later, I got a call from a former employee of Cobalt Solutions, a guy named Jeff who had worked under James. He'd been let go during the company's recent downsizing. "I don't know if you know," Jeff said over the phone, "but things are bad at Cobalt, really bad. James is losing clients left and right. He tried to cut costs by laying off experienced people, but now they're paying the price." I knew what had happened. James had let his ego and his desire to cut corners blind him to what was truly important. The people who had built the company were the ones he'd thrown away, and now the company was crumbling. I felt a mix of satisfaction and sadness. I didn't want to see anyone fail, but James had brought this on himself. He hadn't just lost clients, he'd lost the respect of everyone who had ever worked for him. But me, I was stronger than ever. The final lesson was simple. Age is not a weakness, it is a strength. And I had proven that beyond a shadow of a doubt.